Hello friends, in this lecture we're going to implement the stun state for the enemy. Okay, so in order to implement this, we're going to create a function called stun and call it inside of take damage. We're going to create a timer to keep track of the stun state. We're also going to create a boolean called isStunned so that we can stop the enemy from moving while it's stunned. That is the game plan. Let's go ahead and get started. First of all, we're going to include the header file we need to use timers, which is going to be engine/timer handle.h. Next up, we're going to create the boolean. So right after isAlive, we're going to create a boolean called isStunned. This is going to be false by default, and when the enemy gets stunned, we're going to set this to be true. Next up, we're going to create the timer, which is going to be ftimer handle stun timer. And finally, at the bottom here, we're going to create functions. First of all, we're going to create the stun function, which is going to look like this. It's going to accept a float called duration in seconds. This is going to be how long we stun the enemy for. Then we're going to create the function the stun timer is going to call, which is going to be void on stun timer timeout. Just like that, this is all we need to do inside of the header. Let's go ahead and create the function bodies for these functions. At the bottom here, just like that, we're going to call the stun function inside of this if statement in the else case if the enemy is still alive after we hit it. Because there's no point stunning the enemy if the enemy is dead. So inside of here, we're going to say stun duration. This is the duration we got from the player's attack. So that's what we're going to use. We're also going to go into the tick function, and we're going to add the isStunned here into this if statement. We're going to say not isStunned. So as you remember, this if statement is controlling whether the enemy can move or not. It's also going to control whether the enemy can attack or not in the future. So now we're also checking for this. So if isStunned is true, the enemy is not going to be able to move or attack. Great, so now we're going to implement the stun function. First of all, we're going to set isStunned to true. Just like that, and then we're going to set the stun timer. So as a small challenge, see if you can set the stun timer using the duration in seconds. It's not going to loop. Okay, we're going to call the getWorldTimerManager function to get the timer manager. Set timer, stun timer. We're going to give the function, which is enemy on stun timer timeout. The in rate can be 1, loop is going to be false, and the first delay is going to be duration in seconds. Just like that. And after this, we're going to make a call to getAnimInstance, stop all animation overrides. We need to do this because we're going to implement the attack of the enemy using an animation override. When we stun the enemy, we want that override to stop if the enemy is attacking. If we don't do this, we're not going to be able to stun the enemy while the enemy is attacking, which isn't what we want. So this is going to make more sense once we implement the attacking of the enemy. So there's one more thing we want to do here, and that is checking if the stun timer is already active before we set it. For stunning, we want to be able to stun the enemy multiple times. That means if the enemy is already stunned, we want to clear the stun timer and set it again. So in order to check if the timer is already active or not, we can call isTimerActive stun timer. This is going to return a boolean. So let's save that in a variable called isTimerAlreadyActive. If this is true, that means the enemy is already stunned. In that case, we want to stun it again from the beginning. So we're going to say get world timer manager, clear timer, stun timer, so that the timer is cleared, and then we're going to set it again. So that's how the stun function is going to work. Then inside of the timeout function, we're simply going to set the isStunned variable to false again, so that the enemy can keep moving and attacking again. So this is all we need to do in order to implement the stun state. We are making the call here inside of take damage, so this should be working. Let's go ahead and exit out of Unreal, rebuild the project, and then we're going to take a look at this. So let's go ahead and test this. Now when we attack the enemy, it should get stunned for 0.3 seconds, and while it's running, it should stop and then start moving again. Just like that. It's a little difficult to notice, but the enemy is stopping when I attack it, and then it keeps moving after 0.3 seconds. We can actually go into the player blueprints and go into our variables and change the stun duration to be something like 2 seconds. And now we're going to stun the enemy for 2 seconds, so the effect should be more obvious. I'm going to attack the enemy and then move away. The enemy should be still for 2 seconds, and after the stun duration is over, it should start following me again. And as you can see, it is working. Awesome. That's all we want to do in this lecture. Let's do a recap before we end it. In this lecture, we created a boolean called isStunned that is controlling the enemy's movement and also the enemy's attack state. If it is true, we're not going to do any of those. We have a function called stun that's setting isStunned to true, and then it's setting up a timer. In the timer's timeout function, we're setting isStunned to false to finish the stun state. We're making a call to the stun function here in take damage if the enemy takes damage and is still alive, right here. That is how the stun state works.